What's going on, everyone? Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. I'm your host, Max Torres, with ScoopDuck on 3, coming to you live on a Wednesday, September the 11th, 2024. Got another edition of the Oregon Recruiting Hour here on the Ducks Dish podcast. And joining me to break it all down is ScoopDuck owner and publisher, Justin Hopkins. J-Hop, how we doing? Good morning.
So far, so good. Had a pretty busy last, so like 48-ish hours up to Portland and back. And my son actually got to play soccer on PK Park, Providence Park, where the Timbers play. So apparently that was one of the first times that's ever happened where they had a high school game on the field. So pretty cool for them to be a part of that. But now I'm back home and ready to roll.
Absolutely. Well, that's always fun. Yeah, you got to put your dad cap on, and I know that soccer. You're a big soccer fan, and then you're getting to go out to some of those games as well. So that's definitely a fun thing for you.
Yep, yeah, a lot of soccer in this household. We love our college football, but as far as what we play and stuff like that, it's definitely soccer around here.
There you go. All right, and it's been a fun week so far. My Niners got a Monday Night Football win over the Jets. Absolutely love that. I secured a Week 1 win in fantasy football, even better. And what's also cool, Justin? We're running a promo over at ScoopDuck. You guys can use code GODUCKS for 50% off an annual ScoopDuck membership. Come and see us at ScoopDuck.com. You got me, Justin, Chad Simmons, Steve Wiltfong, Lyndon Heil, and Colin King, all coming to give you the best in Oregon football and recruiting. And we're going to talk some recruiting today, Justin. And we talked recruiting last week, but if you're looking at the Ducks kind of broadly, there really hasn't been too much discussion around the recruiting trail, and maybe not for the reasons that you thought, not because it's just been kind of slow, but because we've been so focused on how Oregon's been doing on the field. And, safe to say that people are scratching their heads a little bit about the Ducks right now, but there's still some recruiting to talk about for sure.
Yeah, definitely a couple of head-scratching weeks on the football field alone, yet Oregon's still 2-0, so you'll take that. That's one more win than Notre Dame has, so you'll take that at the end of the day. Like you said, it's just it's a new recruiting calendar. It's a new recruiting, just the way things are happening, and this is a time where these seniors are basically, worried about their own senior years and what their teams are doing, taking some visits, but not a ton. And then to boot, Oregon, I guess, expected that they would have Idaho and Boise State, which are, decent games at Austin Stadium, but they've got a lot, bigger games, I think, ahead on the schedule. Obviously, Ohio State's one that they're looking at bringing some guys in. And there's some other games in there, maybe Michigan State on a Friday night if that works. So it's just with 15 commits, there wasn't that much need for them to press on a bunch of guys. So I like the fact that we haven't seen a lot of panic from the staff, because that right there tells me internally, that they feel fine with where they're at with the guys they have and maybe, some of the other guys they have on their board. Good morning, Ruben.
Ruben is here as always. Shout out to Ruben and Ranchito Grill. If you guys are here in the live chat, go ahead and leave a comment, maybe ask us a question. We're getting some of those trickling in here as we get underway here on a Wednesday morning. There was a small group of visitors in Eugene. Justin, I know you posted that visitor list over on ScoopDuck in the days leading up to the game. I was able to talk to one of Oregon's visitors, and he didn't have to go too far to get to the game. That is 2026 Vancouver, Washington, Evergreen High School athlete / wide receiver Terren Saryon. Got his highlights rolling here if you guys are watching us on YouTube or Twitter. This is a little bit of a local recruit, right, Justin? I think that's kind of how I look at it. Anyone in the Northwest really is, in my mind, a local recruit, but we know that Vancouver is just outside of the Portland area, so not too far of a trip. Saryon was also in Eugene for Oregon's Saturday Night Live camp at the end of July. And this was his first opportunity to get out for a game day visit. So it was still a pretty crazy environment out there at the Boise State game. Got a couple quotes when I caught up with Saryon following that visit. He said that that was, quote, by far one of the loudest stadiums I've been in. So Saryon is a guy that has been on Oregon's radar for a while. He doesn't have a ton of scholarship offers right now, but I think if you're Dan Lanning, you're not getting a bunch of local talent per se. But if you are finding those guys every cycle that are potential contributors to your program, you got to do your due diligence and bring them in.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think he's a great player, and I think that he's definitely worthy of some scholarship offers around the country. For me personally, at this point in time, I think that the likelihood that he ends up on a full scholarship at Oregon in this class is probably a bit unlikely. Doesn't mean he can't join in another capacity. Maybe they come up with some agreement for him to walk on or something like that, because I know that playing at the University of Oregon carries a lot of value and a lot of weight to these Northwest players and stuff like that. So we'll see how this one goes. I know Oregon has brought him in twice now in basically 2 months, less than 2 months. So there's some interest there. But again, I don't want, I think it would be unfair if you and I got on here and said, hey, look, this is a guy you should watch. We're going to put in a crystal ball prediction for any of that kind of stuff. I think Oregon is just kind of maintaining a relationship at this point with Saryon and just kind of seeing where it goes.
And Saryon has a couple of Oregon connections. The most prominent being wide receiver Justice Lowe, who is of course from I think Lake Oswego out there in the Portland area, and they kind of keep in touch. And he was telling him that it's a great school, even outside of football, just to build your character at, and then you have some other opportunities there as well. And Saryon was very complimentary of the staff's energy. He said that's the biggest thing that stands out to him about Oregon. Looks like UW is another big school on his radar. He's going to be out there this weekend for the Apple Cup. Again, just strange to have rivalry games this early in the year, but you're not going to hear me complaining because that makes for some good football games, Justin. And he's going to be at UW multiple times throughout the year. And then he also mentioned he plans to return to Oregon for the Washington game at the end of November. But as of right now, there are some predictions out there that have Saryon ending up at Oregon. I wouldn't tend to think that he is a take at the moment, but you never know. We'll have to see, just given how hot Oregon has started in the 2026 recruiting class and some of the other high-profile wide receivers that they are after. We got a couple questions here in the live chat. Got to give a shout out to our guy, Andrew, who's here just about every single day. So very much appreciate your loyalty, Andrew. Andrew's question, in your opinion, how much do game results matter to recruits? I.e., if Ohio State blows Oregon out, could that end up costing the Ducks Dorian Brew, Trey McNutt, or others who chose Oregon over Ohio State? Or is it NBD? No big deal. What do we think, Justin?
Very much NBD. I think as much as the, recruiting landscape has changed in the last 3, 4, 5 years, last decade, that's one thing that really hasn't changed much is the outcome of games. Now, I would say this, if Oregon were to go 5-5 or go 6-7 or just basically not have a year that most of us are expecting, yeah, that could change things. The outcome of a single game, however, let's just say they get a big group to Ohio State and for some reason Oregon falls flat on their face in that game. You're not going to see a rash of decommitments. You're not going to see guys basically say, "Well, Oregon's out. I'm not considering them anymore." Not really how it works. They're big picture guys. They're looking at where they fit. They're looking at the roster that these teams are putting together, and they're looking at these teams' ability to compete for national championships year in and year out. So the short answer is no big deal to your question. It's more like I said. At the end of the year, if the record's not really reflective of a team that's being built and competing and stuff like of that nature, then we're having that discussion for sure.
I think that game results matter, but it's not the end all be all. It's not, I don't think someone's going to commit to a school just because they won this game. Or if you lose a game, oh man, there's no way I'm going there. They just lost last week. It just seems like that's such a minute detail to focus on. I will say though, game day environments, game day atmospheres, I think that is very much something that we've seen help Oregon generate momentum or buzz, hype, whatever the word is. It's something positive. Every time I ask a recruit in these interviews I do, Justin, about the atmosphere at Autzen, it's always electric. It's exciting. All the fans are shouting out these recruits because they're so invested in this Oregon team. We know Eugene is a college town. They are so invested in these players, even if they're not Ducks yet, that they want to follow it. They're diehards in every sense of the word. So I think that the Ohio State game is obviously one that you are spotlighting this year. I think that's going to be Oregon's most impressive recruiting weekend from a talent perspective. And that's about a month away now, and we'll see what happens later on in the year. But I think that if the Buckeyes were to beat the Ducks in that game, you can bet that the Ohio State staff is going to use that as a recruiting pitch for some of these guys that they're battling for right now. But I don't think it's an end all be all from game to game. So probably more so on the NBD side of things. Let's hit a couple more of these lives, Justin, before we roll on with some of our other recruits that we're talking about. Next question comes from Matt. Thanks for the question, Matt. Does the outcome of the first two games put added pressure on the coaching staff to emphasize offensive lineman recruiting in the tail end of the 2025 class? What do you think?
I think generally your better run programs are already operating kind of on a multi-year basis. They're typically a couple years out. So, I think, if you look at like what Oregon signed in 2024, as soon as signing day was done and the transfer portal work was done, I'm sure Oregon, already had a really good understanding of what they were going to need, in this 2025 class in terms of continuing to build that depth and at any position. And let's be real, right now, offensive line's in a spotlight, right? They're in a spotlight because of how they're currently playing. They're in a spotlight because there's concerns about depth, lack of depth, how far along these younger guys are progressing, why none of them are ready to contribute. All those questions come into play. So, I think that, right now there's no bigger spotlight on a position group than offensive line in really all phases. And, let's be real. We already knew, it was something I wrote about. We knew heading into this season that offensive line depth was a concern. And I guarantee if I knew it, the staff knew it, right? They are there for every practice. They had spring ball. They know the results of the summer workouts. Like they've got a way better feel on these things than we do. They're months ahead of us. And so, I think there's pressure, but that said, it doesn't do them any good. It does them no good to go find the 3-star from Idaho that has, Idaho State and, Arizona Tech offers and say, well, he's a big body. Let's just bring him in and see what happens. It doesn't do him any good. So, they're going to continue working, prep recruiting and trying to get guys that they feel can be difference makers or contributors. And if they can't get that, they'll supplement through the transfer portal once again and kind of roll the dice there.
I don't think that the outcome of the first two games puts added pressure on this coaching staff. That they've already been locked in and focused on recruiting offensive line for a long time. And it's not like, oh man, our offensive line's been having some trouble these first 2 weeks, Justin. Now we really need to turn up the gas, turn up the heat on their efforts at the position. I don't think that that's the reality that we find ourselves in, that they are going to recruit every position as hard as they possibly can, regardless of the outcome. And just to hit again on this offensive line question, we got another one in here and we'll move on a little bit. Question from DG Flame. Thanks for the question. Says, Mario was a terrible game day coach, but do you think the Lanning era benefited from the Mario offensive line recruiting and development? OL recruiting hasn't been great under Lanning thus far and is frankly frustrating. Clearly the weakest link of the team. Hopefully some recruits hit soon. I'll start with this one, Justin. I don't think, maybe the Lanning era has benefited a little bit from the offensive line recruiting just because of the timing of the hire and when the coaching transition took place. And you can point to guys like Jackson Powers Johnson, Marcus Harper, but let's not forget Josh Connerly was a Lanning recruit. and Ajani Cornelius was a Lanning recruit. You could also talk about Poncho as well. That was a big win for Alik Terry, tapping into his Hawaii ties from his time coaching the Rainbow Warriors program over on the islands. So I think that he's benefited from it to some degree. Any coach is going to benefit from it, depending on some of that overlap that you have from one coach to another, and some of that roster attrition or continuity. But we are still kind of waiting to see, at least in the 24 class or 25 class, who that offensive line recruit is going to be that can kind of kickstart Oregon's momentum a little bit again here at the position. Because you got some great ones in place. Zaire Addison is the headliner of the offensive line haul for Alik Terry in 2025, but you got to keep pushing the envelope and keep trying to recruit that position at a really high level.
I think what you have are two head coaches that prioritized recruiting two positions differently. And so we know Dan Lanning's a defensive head coach, and we know Mario is an offensive line coach. So it's not any surprise that you would see Mario putting an emphasis on offensive line recruiting. Obviously, when he was here, those were most of the targets he was working with firsthand in recruiting. He does a lot of recruiting, but he spent a lot of time with the offensive line guys along with Alex Mirabal. So I don't think it's really any surprise to see him have maybe a little bit more success at the prep recruiting level of offensive linemen than Dan Lanning has so far. Conversely, Mario Cristobal did not have the level of success recruiting defensive linemen the way Dan Lanning has at Oregon so far. So I think you kind of have to look at that. Am I concerned about offensive line recruiting under Dan Lanning? I think concerned is a fair word. Am I panicking? Absolutely not. So, as concerned is here, panicking is over here, feeling great's over here. I'm just in the middle. I think they've, like you said, you note Josh Connerly. The stupid part is, and this is not to pick on DG Flame because it's a great question. A year ago, at this time, exactly 1 year ago, there was virtually zero concerns about offensive line. None. The product on the field was good. They were, holding up really well, whether that was play call, Bo Nix, changes, JPJ, continuity, whatever. The line last year was not an issue. Nobody was talking about it. This year, it's obviously been an issue. It's not playing up to the standard. And so far, recruiting has been good. It hasn't been great, hasn't been elite, hasn't been poor, because that would be mean, that would be negative to say about Zaire Addison and some of the guys they've been able to get committed so far. And, Shaq McCroy and some of those guys in last year's class were big wins as well. Hasn't been elite though, right? There's no Kelvin Banks. There's no, Proctor. There's no Caden Proctor. There, those big guys that Oregon was going after, they didn't get, and they haven't got. So there's no Penei Sewell to hang your hat on if you're Dan Lanning so far. And I do think that this is just a take, and I obviously don't sit in on the NIL negotiations. I think Oregon allocates a lot of its NIL budget for defensive line. I think a little bit needs to be, thrown a little harder at some of these offensive linemen, because let's be fair, at the end of the day, if you're not making the offers on offensive line, they're going to go somewhere that is. So I think Oregon's got the pedigree. I think they've got a good coaching staff in place that can coach those guys and recruit them. Right now, I think that might be the shortfall, but again, I'm just making an educated guess.
And the point about Lanning with the defensive line recruiting and Cristobal with the offensive line recruiting, that just makes a lot of sense, right? Given the focus of those two coaches. And ideally, Justin, I don't think you would want to have a trade-off, but looking at what Oregon has done historically, maybe they can't do it now, but what they have done historically, I think they've been able to do more with less at offensive line. If you look back to the Chip Kelly years, maybe a little bit, I don't even know if we should talk about the Taggart era, but defensive line recruiting, I've been saying it for a while. I remember when I was in Eugene covering this Mario Cristobal-led Oregon program, and I was saying the defensive line recruiting has fallen short. And now it doesn't feel like that's where we find ourselves under Dan Lanning. So maybe you do have to have some kind of a trade-off. Maybe you can allocate some more of those resources towards the offensive line moving forward. But I also think as Alik Terry continues to coach and ideally has some more success, he's going to make more of a name for himself and maybe be able to generate some more buzz there along the offensive line. And there's still a ways to go as far as recruiting goes in the 2025 cycle. But really, really good question from DG Flame. Always like having you guys comment a little bit to inspire some discussion. Before we go any further today, want to give a quick shout out to one of our sponsors here on the Ducks Dish podcast. That is Ranchito Grill in Springfield. Not sure what your dinner plans are tonight, but head on over to Ranchito Grill. Try out their homemade tortillas. They got great food, a great environment, and they will take care of you. Say what's up to my guy Ruben and let him know that Max Torres sent you. We're rocking and rolling on a Wednesday morning. Sure glad to have you along. Thanks for tuning in. Max Torres and Justin Hopkins of ScoopDuck on 3. Make sure you like the video and subscribe to the channel. Maybe you take it a step further and hit that notification bell so you never miss out when Justin or I go live to cover the Oregon Ducks. And Justin, there was another big-time visitor that we got to talk about over the weekend. One of the very best defensive backs in the country coming out of Southern California. That is RJ Simmons out of Rancho Cucamonga School in the Inland Empire, home to CJ Stroud before he ended up at Ohio State and now with the Houston Texans. He came out for a visit, and it looks like this recruitment is largely a two-team race between Oregon and USC. Our Chad Simmons was able to get some quotes from Sermon following the visit, and he said, quote, "This visit definitely made a big impact. The environment was rocking. It was good to get a feel of how a game day is structured. It was a solid performance by the team. The secondary and their ability to play stood out to me." So Oregon is still right in the thick of it here for Sermons.
Yeah, right where you want to be, right? Because we're both acknowledging this is a 2026 recruit and a target, but kind of one of those must win. And I say that because I mean, if you turn around and you take an honest look here, USC and Lincoln Riley is closing the gap, right? They're closing the gap on the field. Obviously, their defensive staff have made improvements there, that they're putting a better product, a more complete product on the field currently. Oregon versus USC right now would be a real interesting matchup, the way they're both playing today. If you're Lincoln Riley, you're looking to parlay that into some recruiting success, because right now, Dan Lanning's been able to stuff him in a locker on nearly every defensive recruit and a number of even, the better offensive recruits out west. So they're starting to chip away at it. And if you're Oregon, you don't want them chipping away at all. And so, a guy like RJ Simmons here, he's a legacy as a Trojan. He's a USC guy. I think, frankly, the door was open for Oregon because they had yet to show a pulse on defense under Lincoln Riley's watch, and now they look better. So I'm certain that that's closed the gap significantly on what was probably a little bit in Oregon's favor, even though he was a USC legacy. Now you look at this differently. If you're a legacy, you got, dad that played there and going to get a little bit of a push on that. And now USC has a reasonable defense to offer him or to sell him on. So, this is kind of one that becomes a very big one for Oregon and USC, because this would be a statement win, if you will, on the recruiting trail for Lincoln Riley. And for Dan Lanning, should you lose out on this player to USC, it could signal a bit of a change that you don't want. So, very, very important. Obviously, he's talked about making a decision in this calendar year. I don't think one's coming in the next week or two or even 3 weeks, but it wouldn't surprise me to see if in the next month or two that RJ Simmons might prepare to make a commitment somewhere. And, this could be a class building commitment for USC on the defensive front, or this could continue to be, a sign that they haven't closed the gap quite enough on Oregon to get these kind of guys.
It's certainly notable and worth tracking the USC developments on the recruiting trail, because the Trojans are using this momentum that they've had, even though it's only 2 games, that the defense and the defensive improvements have largely been the biggest storyline around Lincoln Riley's program this year. And the offense has been great, but that's what you expect. All these recruits, I think, that are looking at USC as an option, at least the defensive recruits, they've been kind of sitting there with that question in their mind. What's D'Anton Lynn going to do? Is this group going to be improved, or is it going to mirror more of what we saw in 2023? And I think Sermons, just to give a little bit more on him, Simmons in his write-up on Sermons, which you can read over on ScoopDuck, he did get a quote saying that it looks like he's going to commit after the season. So again, would kind of support this calendar year being the timeline for RJ Sermons. And Oregon's also battling to try to let Brandon Lockhart, a USC cornerback, commit in the 2026 class out of Los Angeles, right here in my backyard, Loyola High School. He was out in LA for a visit as the USC Trojans took down the Utah State Aggies. So we're seeing more and more, just like every cycle, Justin, that USC Oregon overlap. And I think I might be close to putting in a prediction for another USC target, another top West region guy in Jerome Miles out of Corner Canyon, who has absolutely exploded onto the scene this fall with some big games. Most notably, I think that win over IMG Academy. So Oregon versus USC, not going anywhere on the recruiting trail. They don't play each other this year, but they do, of course, continue to battle when it comes to top players anywhere in the country, but certainly in Southern California. Justin, we got one more guy I think we need to talk about here on today's episode of the Ducks Dish podcast, the 2025 recruit that has recently kind of popped onto my radar, and that is 2025 West Albany tight end Austin Simmons, who is currently committed to the Washington State Cougars. He's been committed to Wazoo since April of this year, listed at 6'5", 220 pounds. He made it out to Eugene for a visit this past weekend, which I think is notable. As we know, Oregon still doesn't have a tight end commitment in the 2025 class. So you're by no means abandoning your options for some of those guys that you've been recruiting, but hey, you're kind of just still doing your homework, doing some digging, and seeing if Simmons maybe has some interest. And I think that you feel pretty confident that he would, considering that he is committed to Wazoo. And I think that Oregon is probably an offer that would move the needle should it come.
Yeah, I mean, if you're Oregon and you're looking at your board and what you need, tight end is behind offensive line, but it is up there. And I think that what I do like about this staff and people kind of forget is just that they do a really good job giving themselves options. And what I mean by that is they don't just recruit 2 guys and let everybody else go by the wayside until they need them. They recruit a lot of guys at a pretty high level, obviously put a little more effort in some of those elite guys. But I mean, a guy like Austin Simmons doesn't come around if Oregon hasn't, at least, had some conversations and stuff for a while now. Like you said, I think this is one they'll be careful with offering and pushing for. I don't know that, I feel as though if Oregon made an offer and made a big push, they could probably get, earn his commitment and get a flip from him fairly easily. So I think they're going to move a little bit carefully there, but along the same path that, hey, look, maybe we're not able to get one of these other guys that we've offered, that we've continued recruiting. So, now we've got another option down the line here a little bit if we need to move that direction. So this one will be interesting to me. Again, obviously not really a take at this particular moment in time for Oregon. But keep in mind, most of these guys have only played a week or 2 of their high school season. So, if you're, as a staff, you're watching his film every week, you're seeing how he develops, you're seeing how he moves this senior year. Because let's not forget, there's a lot of guys out there that can blossom in a senior year. And so you don't want to lose sight of those guys that maybe are late bloomers or just, didn't have the right fit on their team or whatever the case might be. So I think that's important to remember, that we're just a couple weeks into senior years for a lot of these guys. So it's a really good time for this staff to look at a guy like Austin Simmons or possibly go find an offensive lineman or 2 that they're going to evaluate a little bit more and see how they've progressed.
Certainly a guy to keep an eye on here. Austin Simmons, the 2025 Washington State tight end commit out of West Albany, Oregon. We'll see if the Ducks do, in fact, extend an offer at some point. But some of the big targets that we've seen Oregon go after at tight end include Caleb Edwards, an Alabama commit out of Northern California, Lincoln Cure, a Kansas State commit out of the state of Kansas, Deshaun Brame, also out of the state of Kansas, was at one point committed to the Ducks, but decided to change his mind and flip to the Tennessee Vols. So no shortage of names to keep an eye on in the 2025 recruiting class for Dan Lanning and the Ducks. Got one more question that I think we can kind of take here, Justin, to before we ride off into the sunset here on a Wednesday edition of the Ducks Dish podcast. This one comes from Anton Z, who says, we all love the 5-star conversations. Who's at the top of the list for Oregon in the 2026 recruiting class? I think we both got a couple of names that we could throw out there, Justin.
Yeah, I mean, you got to start with Jakeem Stewart, obviously the number one player, potentially reclassifying. So we'll see there. That hasn't fully happened as widely speculated, but he did recently switch schools, high schools, and is not playing this season at his new high school. So adds a little bit of intrigue there. Maybe something will happen. But yeah, I mean, Jakeem Stewart's got to be, I think, at the top of the board. Of course, the next thing would be like, a guy like Tony Cumberland, that's a pretty high 4-star, committed to Oregon, recently moved to Eugene. You're going to want to keep that guy committed. You and I talked about RJ Sermons just a few minutes ago, one of the top cornerbacks in the country, obviously out west, Oregon versus USC battle. So there's 3 right off the top of my head. And it feels like, there's a whole, Zion Ely, a whole host of 5-star guys that have visited Oregon already. Jackson Cantwell, if we want to talk about offensive line recruiting, number 1 ranked offensive tackle in the country, has visited Oregon. I think he recently trimmed his list to like 8 or 10 or something like that. Oregon was on the list. I don't get too wild about top 10 lists, but I mean, that's a kid from Missouri that, Dan Lanning's been wanting to kind of get into. And obviously, that would really quiet some people if Oregon could get a 5-star offensive line commit early in the 2026 class.
And Cantwell is from Lanning's home state of Missouri, so maybe that gives the Ducks a little bit of an inside track there. We'll see if he gets back on campus for a game visit later this summer. I know he's got a busy visit slate here in the fall. Let's see some other names. Jakeem Stewart, like you mentioned, Justin, I think the report is that he transferred to Edna Carr in the state of Louisiana. So we can fully expect the LSU Tigers to be a team that is really alive and well in that recruitment. Seems like USC has picked up some pretty significant steam in his recruitment as well, based on the latest that I've been hearing, some chatter out here in Southern California. He was on scene for that win over LSU to start the season out there in Las Vegas. A couple other names. Chris Henry Jr. is certainly a big one that I've been tracking out here in my neck of the woods in Southern California. The 5-star wide receiver currently committed to Ohio State is the number 1 ranked player at his position this 2026 cycle, according to On3. A couple other big names that I think are worth keeping an eye on. We talked about Brandon Lockhart earlier on. I think another name that's worth tracking is running back Deshaun Rideau out of Oaks Christian in Westlake Village, California. He's a big running back, and we know that Rashad Samples has already gone into Southern California since he joined the staff to get a running back commit, and Jordan Davison out of Mater Dei. And then you also have Javian Osborne, a really big-time running back. I think he's On3's number 1 running back in the 2026 class out of Forney, Texas, where the Ducks got Aaron Flowers in the 2024 class. So plenty of big names to track. I think Brock Harris is another one. He's not a 5-star quite in the 2026 class, but he's originally from Portland, and he's playing his high school ball, I should say, in the state of Utah. So bunch of names that we just kind of threw out there for you guys here as we kind of wind down here on today's episode of the podcast. But before we wrap up, Justin, any final thoughts on Oregon football recruiting before I let you go?
No, kind of that calm before the storm. Obviously, if Oregon can get past Oregon State this weekend, possibly even put together a well-disciplined, complete game, I know that would make a lot of us happy. And, and I think we'll see an uptick in recruiting in the coming weeks, kind of leading up to that Ohio State game a little bit before. Of course, there's a bye week in there, which not only allows for the team to kind of rest or get a little better, but also for the coaches to hit the road for a couple of days. So we might get a little bit of recruiting news from that. So keep sticking with us. Make sure you guys are subscribed, so that way when we do these live videos, you get a notification right on your phone that we're live.
There you go. There you go. Definitely expect recruiting to pick up here in the coming weeks. Like you said, Justin, I always love having things to cover, and there's been some visitors here and there, but not a whole lot going on in the world of Oregon recruiting just yet. But I think that's going to change in a big way before too long, which is why it's important that you guys check us out over at ScoopDuck.com. Take advantage of that 50% off promo that we got going. Use the code GODUCKS to help you get ready for the Civil War matchup with Oregon State this week. It's going to be a fun one, 12:30 kickoff in Corvallis. Believe that game is on ABC. You want to find more of Justin, you can follow him on Twitter/X at JHopkinsSD. Find me on any social media platform at mtorresports. Subscribe to the Scoop Duck on 3 YouTube channel and share the show. Share the Duck Dish podcast with your friends, with your family, and with other Duck fans. But until next time, thanks for rocking with us and listening to another episode of the Duck Dish podcast.